Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. Before we start, I need to say a huge welcome and a massive thank you to the newest subscribers. Hello to Karen and John on Patreon, and hello to Craig on Red Circle. Thank you so much for coming to support the show through subscribing to the exclusive content. I hope you enjoy going through and listening to the available episodes. I also wanted to thank Ronit for signing and sending out 3 exclusive copies of her memoir When She Comes Back, which we featured as a giveaway in the month of September. Congratulations to the 3 lucky winners. We are now running a new memoir in October's #Memoir Monday giveaway, and this is a book titled Mating in Captivity by author Helen Zuman, who spent years in a group named Zendik. To find out more about Helen's story and to listen to my very first interview on the podcast, check out episodes 7 and 8. For a chance to win a copy of Helen's insightful and compelling memoir, simply follow, like and comment on any of my social media content across October to be automatically entered into the giveaway. This can be on either Twitter, Facebook, Instagram or TikTok. You can find me at CultVaultPod. Today we are looking at a familiar topic on the show, but interestingly, we are going to be gaining our first English perspective as Miriam talks us through her many years of involvement with the Unification Church. So now, here is Miriam. Hi Miriam, and thank you so much for joining me today. We've covered this particular topic today in detail, but I do look forward to gaining your perspective because this will be a story from someone that grew up in the UK. So would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Hi, thank you for having me on your wonderful podcast. My name is Miriam. I live in Wiltshire in England. For your international listeners, I'm about 45 minutes away from Stonehenge. That's my international landmark. And I was born into the Unification Church in England. And leaving is an interesting question, but I would say in my about early 30s was when I actually finally left, which was a long journey. And that whole time I lived and worked in a variety of church buildings, dormitories, boarding schools. I was very fully immersed in the Unification Church.
And this religion didn't start in the UK, so I'm wondering if you can just kind of give us a brief background into where it started in the world and how it found its way over to England.
So the Unification Church is founded by Reverend Sun Myung Moon, and he was born in Korea in 1920. According to what we've been told, he had revelation when he was 15 or 16 on a mountain where Jesus came to him and asked him to continue his mission. So according to the doctrine of the Unification Church, Jesus didn't fulfill his mission. He was supposed to create a family and solve the problem of original sin through that. And because he wasn't able to do that, he needed to ask someone to be his second coming, which was the Reverend Moon, according to the doctrine. And that was when he was 15. And then a lot of things happened before 1954, when the Unification Church was officially founded, I understand. And from then, in 1961, I think, was the first mass wedding, which is what the Unification Church is famous for in Korea. And after that, their missionaries were sent out to further countries, America, Europe, Japan. And from there, I think it was in the late 60s where it arrived in Great Britain and the rest of Europe. And that's when my parents joined, and that's how I got in.
And were your parents together when they joined the church, or did they meet within the church?
So my dad joined when he was in his early 20s in Rome, and he was the first Italian brother to join the Unification Church. And my mum joined in England, and she was the first British sister to join the Unification Church. So in Britain, they are something of elder couples. So they knew each other, because back then in the church there were not a lot of European members, so they had met and did get on. And of course they didn't think of each other in that way, because the church is very strict about those kind of things. But when one of the leaders suggested that they be a good match for an upcoming mass wedding, they both very gratefully said yes please. And the Reverend Moon approved that match. So he didn't directly match them, but it was recommended to him and he approved their match. So they did know each other, but they met through the church. And they were in one of the first mass weddings, the 777 couples in 1970 in Korea.
So this is a case of a couple who have been matched, but not kind of as things happened a bit later on, where a lot of people were matched through photographs, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit as we go on. But one of those rare cases of two people that already knew each other and were happy to be matched to each other, not just out of obligation to their devotion to Reverend Moon and the church, but to each other as well.
Yeah, they were. I think, in my opinion, this was unusual and very fortunate that they really liked each other. What was interesting is that of all the couples that I know, there are some who openly say they really didn't like their spouse when it was picked. Some who are still together but clearly unhappy. And my parents' struggle was that they really liked each other, but their missions kept pulling them apart. So much as they were really happy to be together, they weren't actually allowed to be together for a lot of their time in the church.
So it's one of those, there's never a perfect solution within this type of high demand religious group.
Yeah, and definitely enjoyment, fun and love, especially romantic love, was just not, I mean, it wasn't disallowed. Within marriage you can be romantically in love, but you should really be focusing on the mission. So if people were too in love and too happy, well, clearly they weren't doing their mission. So I think there was a little bit of leadership arrangement to sort of make sure that the suffering was continuing. You didn't want them to be too happy.
Oh, it's just terrible. And the more you hear the stories and the more people come forward and talk about it, you know, we've had Jen, Lisa and Teddy have come to speak on the show, and I think it just the more stories you hear, the more it cements this idea that things are purposefully done to keep families apart, to keep people away from each other, so that people will stay focused on the mission. And I'm sure that people that are still devoted to the church to this day will have very plausible reasons why these things are done, why people were separated and sent to certain places, like, oh, they were chosen for the mission, and things like that. But it just happens too many times to kind of not be the reason why it's done, unfortunately. Yeah. But how many children did your parents go on to have together?
So that's an interesting question to start with, because it depends how you count. My parents gave birth to 8 biological children, but there was a thing in the 80s in the church where parents who could give birth to lots of children were encouraged or invited to give away children to those who couldn't. I don't know if you've heard of this offering child.
Yeah.
And so of the 8 children that my parents gave birth to, 2 were given to other families. One was done in a way that was complete. Everyone was completely cool with it, and they conceived the child for the other family, and it was all arranged, and we all knew that mum was pregnant, but it wasn't going to be our baby sister or brother. And there was a ceremony, and we were all there, and it was all done lovely, and no one was too traumatized, I don't think. And the girl who was given away is grown up, is happy, successful. She knows the situation. She's happy in her family, and as far as I know, is doing great. The little brother who was given away was a slightly more complex situation, where he was given away after he was born, where we all thought we had our baby brother, but after 3 weeks there were revelations and there were spiritual circumstances that that led to him being given to another family. and my parents weren't entirely sure of these like spiritual messages, so they checked it with the Reverend Moon, and he said, yeah, sure, go for it. So with the Reverend Moon's approval, this baby was given away, and he grew up in the family not knowing his background and knowing that he looked different from his parents, and he gradually worked it out. And then when he was 18, he came back to our family. So at that point, then we went from 6 to 7. So it's an interesting question to start with, how many in our family. We now say 7 because of our brother who's returned, and he now has 2 families, and it's taken him a long time and quite a lot of struggle to acclimatize and work through all his stuff, but he's now very peaceful, very chill about it all, and joins us for our family Zoom calls all the time.
Wow.
He's like back to being one of the family, and he says he's got 2 families. So, but he's got a very interesting story all of his own that I'm sure one day will be told.
There is so much in there. I believe it's actually Teddy's family had another child that they also did give away as well. So he has a sister who lives with another family.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I'd heard of the child being offered to other families. And do you think that was used as an incentive for people who couldn't bear their own children, or people that wanted to have blessed children to join the church and commit themselves to the church? They were given the promise of a blessed child.
No, I don't think that was ever used as an incentive to join, but it was, once you remember, and the part of the doctrine of the Unification Church is you need to resemble God, and God is both masculine and feminine. So a marriage is of masculine and feminine, but you only fully resemble God once you've created children like God created the children. So you couldn't necessarily fulfill your mission as a blessed family if you weren't having children. So and I listened to another podcast just recently, at Elgin's Falling Out podcast, where there was an offering child on there, and she's called it a ticket to heaven. So she referred to herself as the ticket to heaven, because without her adopted parents wouldn't be able to get into heaven because they wouldn't have fulfilled their responsibility. So it's kind of like a requirement as a blessed family. So all the blessed families who gave away children, well, I don't know all of them, but generally people were happy to help another blessed family to achieve that. And every situation is different, but in our family, I know we just have 2 quite different cases.
Absolutely. And I've listened to you say, like, the first one was not too traumatic for everybody, and then the second time round was very different. But I mean, I've got a friend who is a surrogate. She's a surrogate, and she's now pregnant with her third baby that she has agreed to help another family to have their baby. So this is the 3rd time she's gone through this, and I think that's incredible. I imagine that to do that for a family, there must be a lot of planning involved, and maybe some therapy or counselling before you start, after you start. I know the adoption process is very extensive, and they go to the widest family members and kind of go through what the best ways to support the child, even if that family member might only come into contact with that child in once every 3 years or something. So I can imagine, to be a surrogate in a program, there is a lot of that involved as well. But if it's organized within the church, I don't think there would be too much of that available. And the thing that really kind of makes my chest go really tight and makes me feel uncomfortable is and I don't know if listeners will be kind of, oh yeah, you say this all the time, but because my daughter is so young, when people talk about their children now or talk about their families, I'm immediately kind of putting myself in that position and thinking, how would I deal with that? with my children. And when our daughter was born, she seemed so perfect and healthy. They discharged her on the same day she was born, but then a week later we were back in the hospital with she was really jaundiced, and she had a heart murmur as well. So they wanted to keep her in for some tests and stuff. And she's absolutely perfectly fine now, but they would have to take her away, and I wouldn't be able to go with them for like blood tests and things like that. And even being in the same hospital, but having her taken away from me when she was only a week old, still now, like, I can feel my heart's kind of starting to speed up and stuff. So I cannot fathom or comprehend what your parents and what you as an entire family unit must have gone through when that little baby boy was given to another family. I can't even begin to it really actually makes me upset to think about how difficult that must be for you and your parents, especially your mum. The psychology and the trauma behind that must be, to this day, like, gut-wrenching. It's just really sad to think about.
You know what, when I tell my story to people, obviously I'm used to it and I know this and I can be a bit flippant about it, and then I hear it from someone's point of view and I'm like, God, that's terrible. Like, it's suddenly, I can see how shocking that is. And I think it did have quite an impact on definitely on my mum, for sure, but that's her experience and her story. But on the rest of us, we all dealt with it differently. And because I was really devout and really religious, I just saw it as another wonderful piece of suffering that our family was blessed to endure. And I know my brothers were not of that opinion. And but what was interesting was that 3 months after he was given away, a fire started in the kitchen where his baby basket used to be. So for all of us, I think we needed that kind of a sign, like, okay, it was really good. It was a really good thing that we gave away this baby. Otherwise, he would have been in that. I mean, probably he wouldn't have, but, it at the time, I needed that kind of sign from God that you've done the right thing. And the fact that right now we're so close with him and he's really successful. He's a performer. He's got a great life. He's good. So you kind of are like, okay, it worked out all right in the end. But at the time, it was really, anyway, there was no support. There was no psychological understanding of the trauma that was causing everyone. So,
yeah. And at that stage, I suppose, you've grown up from it since birth and your parents have been involved in the church for so long and you've practiced this doctrine every single day. I know the rituals in the morning, they start really early in the day and you carry on those practices throughout the day. You push away all these sinful thoughts, which basically just mean push away any free thinking or critical thinking, as well as reaffirming your religious beliefs by thinking about God and thinking about being pure and thinking about being closer to God and thinking about Reverend Moon and him being the true father and all these things. That when this did happen, your parents probably didn't realize that legally there was any other option, because then if you were to deny Reverend Moon, everything you've done for your whole life is going to be for nothing, because you're still going to end up being a sinner or not following God's word or God's will, because you're disagreeing with the Reverend Moon himself, who has blessed this decision for this little boy to be given to another family.
Yeah, and you can't, but once you start to question or go against one thing, then everything would unravel. So this, much later on in my life, I learned about cognitive dissonance and the inability to hold two conflicting thoughts. So you see things that don't make sense and you're just like, can't process that. And you need everything to stay safe around you. And if something starts to crumble at one end, you push it away because it's too frightening for everything to unravel. For my older siblings, I don't know if this event triggered it, but it was in our teen years in the 90s when the older siblings really began to let go of the faith. So chronologically, it was in that order.
And I think it's quite poignant in Lisa's book that she's released, To the Moon and Back, her memoir that I read and just thought it was an incredible piece of work. And she's been on the show to speak about her experiences and her memoir. And she speaks about trying to have absolute control over her diet because she feels like she's starting to lose grip on other things that she has control over in terms of her faith. You know, she's interacting with worldly people outside of the church, and starting to feel like she's slipping away from her relationship to her faith. So tries to control what she's eating to manage that, and ends up with an eating disorder that she sees as punishment, but then that suffering is bringing her back to God, is bringing her relationship. So when you said there that it was one more suffering to endure to maintain your relationship with God, or to be closer to Reverend Moon in your faith, and that's what that brought me back to, was that same suffering that Lisa spoke about in her book, and all these different things that she suffered or didn't experience, or did to herself because she wanted to punish herself for having sinful thoughts and being around people outside of the church, and feeling like she was being led astray and all these things. And if anybody would be interested in hearing about somebody's story in written form, then Lisa's book, To the Moon and Back, I definitely do recommend. It is a fantastic read. But Lisa was different to you as a child in the church, and because your parents were blessed by Reverend Moon before they had children, that made you different or special. I'm saying in inverted commas because I don't know what it all means, but I'm sure you can explain it to us.
Yes, I will do my best. So out of these mass weddings, I understand Teddy and Jen have described in detail the holy wine and the sex rituals that potentially, anyway, the background to this, but how all of that interesting stuff leads to the fact that through the blessing, your original sin is removed. So the children born from that have no original sin. So my parent, every of the on my parents' generation, the children born from them are blessed children, and as such we have, according to the doctrine, no original sin. They do like to remind us though that we've got hereditary sin, personal sin, and collective sin. You know, we're not free completely, but we carry this responsibility of a sinless blood lineage, and this lineage is so precious and so important that it's our responsibility to carry it and to not mess it up. And of course, because the fall of Adam and Eve was all about sex, then the responsibility of the blessed children and anyone in the blessing is to be really, really sacredly pure about sex, and not have it outside of the blessed marriage at all, not even think, touch, look, none of that. We were very strictly told all about that. So as a blessed child, you're carrying this responsibility of the lineage, which makes you really special. And I was told that God loved me more than my friends at school, which is a horrible and terrible thing to tell a 7-year-old, because of course they believe it, but then they see their friends at school are actually really lovely people, sometimes lovelier than the other blessed children, and they feel really special and they know God loves them. But also at the same time at school, they don't really have any friends because the friends think they're weird and call them moomins. And like I went to a really lovely village school, but we were different and we knew it, and the other children knew it and kept their distance. And I had, on my 8th birthday party, I invited all the girls in my class, and I'd been to a party the week before and all the girls were there. So I was so excited. They were all going to come around my house. But because I was living in a Mooney commune, the whole village was very wary of this house. And I sat there on the doorstep and 2 girls came. God bless them. I'm so grateful that they came. But then the leader of the house was like, okay, Miriam, I think it's time to cut the cake. And I'm like, but they haven't all come yet. And she's like, yeah, we just need to cut the cake now. And I didn't understand why. So there was like this gradual awareness that being a blessed child was really lovely and special, but it also meant that we were really different and a bit weird.
I think that that is probably relatable for anybody that thinks about the reasons why somebody might be picked on at school, which happens everywhere. People always say our school has a zero bullying tolerance policy. No, we have a zero. What is that? How they say it? Zero bullying, zero tolerance for bullying.
Tolerance to bullying policy. Yeah,
that's it. And I don't know how you can have that, how that can actually genuinely exist and be effective. I'm not sure. I have experienced bullying throughout school. I'm sure most people have, and I'm sure it's for reasons that make them different to the general population of that school. So when I was younger and I was going through school, if you had ginger hair, that was what you were picked on for. All these horrible names, all this taunting, all these, to this day, people I know still go by their nicknames that they were given because they have ginger hair. And I think that within the church, you were seen as incredibly special and treated as if you were incredibly special. Again, we can see that in Lisa's book, especially when she hangs around with Reverend Moon's children themselves. Yeah. You can see a lot of that. But to people outside of the church, because there is something significantly different about you that might not be the color of your hair or the freckles on your face, or you have a green backpack and everyone else has a red backpack, or whatever it is that the kids want to pick on, that is going to make you a target. And I guess that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, and I think credit to them, the people in my little Wiltshire Village school, they weren't necessarily nasty, but I think the parents were genuinely scared of what would happen to their little children if they disappeared into this big old house where we were staying as a nursery. So there was like 30 of us living in this house without our parents, and a van full of the school age kids would go up the village to the school. So the whole village knew it was a really bit weird down there.
And this was your 8th birthday, so this was around 85, 86?
It was 86, yeah.
So you've got plenty of stuff going on in America around the Unification Church, but you've also had things like Jonestown have happened in 79. Yeah. So everybody is starting to kind of become a bit wary about these insular communities.
Yeah. And in England, I think in the early 80s, the Daily Mail did a whole thing about brainwashing in the Unification Church, and the church took them to court to fight that and didn't win. So it was all in the papers about the Moonies brainwashed and split up families, and whether it was ever proved or not, the fact is people were worried, and that was the reputation, and that was the house that we were living in. We'll call it Ivy House for purposes of this discussion because it's still there and still running. So everyone in the village was really wary and didn't want to send their children there. But we were growing up and we thought it was wonderful because it was a big old house in the countryside, not realising that outside of the fence, people were scared of us.
But the fact that this newspaper, however credible or incredible the stories are that come out in this particular newspaper, for anybody that is listening outside of the UK, the Daily Mail is probably not the most credible reference to go to if you want to research things. They do have a lot of interesting articles, and I'm sure I've referenced them before in other episodes, probably on the conspiracy episodes I do. I feel like that the Daily Mail is probably more suited to that, but they're a well-known newspaper nonetheless. So they've released this article that is probably consumed by the masses, and they're talking about the Unification Church going to court because they're splitting up families and brainwashing people. For then the Unification Church to turn around and say, we're not splitting families up, but then you're living in this house with all the other kids.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I didn't even think about that. I was the family that was being split up. Yeah.
which again is something I wanted to draw back to Lisa's story, where she talks about her mum going to live in one of these houses to look after everybody else's children, but leaving her own children behind. And Lisa's thinking, but what about us? But they weren't blessed children.
Again, still children. They were still children.
Still children.
Yeah, Lisa's story was, I read the book as well. Just unbelievable that the things that people give up for the church, and it's always the children. And I think back then in the 70s and 80s, people didn't understand child psychology like they do now. And I think generally they had no idea the serious damage that was being done. It doesn't excuse it, but people were not even thinking that people are going to have lifelong trauma because you've abandoned them at 4 years old.
So different to Lisa's story, you were living in Ivy House with all the other children, and you had other people's parents looking after you because your parents had church responsibilities that meant they couldn't always be there.
Yes, so that the Ivy House was bought to be a school for the blessed children in 1974, and at that time there was one blessed child in England. And then more, obviously, were born, including our family. And the school started off as a boarding school where we lived in, and my mum was the teacher there. So it wasn't too bad because she was the teacher. I was in her class. There was about 8 of us. It was really small, really cute. And we had normal academic lessons, but then church teaching, Sunday service, that kind of thing at the weekends. Then in 1982 or 84, anyway, when I was 4, 1984, the school was closed, and that's when it became a nursery, because by then there were loads more babies. There was babies and toddlers that all these members were having. And of course, to do their mission, it was much more efficient to put all the babies in one place and have 4 aunties look after them than to have everybody at home. So at the nursery, the biggest number, I think, was 54 at one time when there was a special pioneering mission going on. But usually there was about 30, 35 of us. And we were all, so there were 3 of us that were school age. And then I had one sister in a toddler's nursery and one brother in a baby nursery. And we were all split up across the house. And my sister and I used to steal our baby brother from his nursery and bring him off to the girls' room and like jump around and play Jungle Book stories and like have a baby brother before the auntie would come and go, we need to take him back now, time to take him back. So we had to like secretly hang out with our siblings within this house. And the whole time, I mean, we were safe, we were fed, we were looked after, but we were so, I mean, I just remember crying like nearly every night because our parents weren't there, and wishing and praying that they would come back. And we get postcards from wherever in the world they were. And all the children were getting postcards and letters. So it was a good time to start a stamp collection. I got stamps from all over the world because there were all these letters and packages arriving from everywhere. But then I was thinking about that recently, and every single stamp represented another separation, another month apart, another parent who's probably crying and heartbreaking just as much as the child is to be separate. So this Ivy House became like a symbol of incredible sadness and abandonment for most of the children of that generation. Anyone who was a child, a British blessed child in the sort of 80s, early 80s, yeah.
And again, it's just more of that suffering that you mentioned at the start that everybody had to endure to keep their relationship with their faith as strong as possible.
Yeah, and even there were some mothers who were at the nursery looking after children, but not their own children. So they were positioned in the upstairs room with the toddlers while their baby was in the other room with a different auntie. Like, they could have arranged it so that there would be a little bit less heartbreak, but it seemed to be maximize the separation and suffering. And my mum was apparently there for a whole summer, and none of us can remember it. So it may be that was the summer where we went off to the farm, but like I don't remember her being there, but there's a photo and she remembers it. So clearly she was there looking after other children than us. And, I mean, the house has got, 12 rooms or something. It's not that big. But
wow, so very meticulous and methodical in the way that the families are being kept away from each other, not just brothers and sisters, but also mothers and daughters and sons and mothers, and even if they were in the same space, they were kept away from one another. Wow, I didn't realize it was that severe.
I think that I can imagine from like my mum's point of view or any of the other aunties, they wouldn't want to show extra love to their own child because they would want to be fair and, do you know what I mean, do their mission, because their mission is to look after these really precious blessed children. So in their mind, every blessed child is of equal value and their own parental relationship is not as important as their mission. So I can see from their point of view how they could cope with that. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I can understand. Must be so difficult as well from your parents' perspective to try and shut down that parental love and try and treat all of the blessed children the same, even when, if you lined them all up in a row, they're biological children that they have this biological and chemical connection to, that your brain develops so that you will favor your children amongst other children, so that you will keep your children alive, like the basic survival instinct. To try and shut those off to further your commitment to the church must then change the chemistry in your brain so much to the point that when you step away, it must be so hard to. I can't even begin to imagine how you would fight off your primary instincts to replace them with how somebody else thinks that you should behave, or how somebody else thinks you should be living your life, and then to go back on that and decide that you don't want to live the way that person has told you to live for however many years, and then go back to it's such a complicated thing.
Yeah, and I think I don't know of everyone's situation, but I can imagine there's a lot of buried feelings and a lot of things that were just never discussed and never explored, and people are either dealing with it now or they're still not dealing with it. But I know that a lot of the children who grew up there, it's just a thing amongst second generation, this whole abandonment and neglect and separation. It's a common theme that a lot of us deal with for the rest of our lives, in relationships in our 40s. We're like, oh yeah, I've got real separation anxiety. Where did that come from? Oh yeah, it's that one again. It's still there for me anyway.
And when you were growing up, did you feel like your parents didn't want to be with you, or did you realize that your parents were just carrying out their missions for the church?
Yeah, no, we knew they loved us. I knew I was loved by them, but I suppose as a 5-6-year-old, their absence is what you register.
Mm-hmm.
The letters and the visit. We did get visits on holy days and special occasions, and there was so much love and hugging and holding on tight. I remember just holding on so tight, like, okay, but don't go this time, all of that. So there was a lot of love, but there was I think I was particularly susceptible to this thing of my parents are doing God's will and doing the good thing, and I'm a good blessed child. And in all the letters at the end, it's be good for God and true parents, be a good girl. And this was my sort of identity growing up, was I'm the good girl, I'm doing what I'm told. And I was talking about this with my sister ages ago, when I was ages later, when I was in professional context and I was a bit of a workaholic, and I was saying, I've got to be the good girl, I've got to work really, really hard. And she said, why? So that mummy and daddy will come back. And I was like, oh my God, like, it's still that good girl mentality is I've got to keep mummy and daddy happy, and maybe then the world will be restored. And when the world is restored, then maybe mummy and daddy will come back. So it's like the logic of a 5-year-old still playing out in a professional context. So yeah, knew there was love, but the separation was necessary for the mission. So I accepted it, I guess.
And have you had a conversation with your parents since, and how they felt when they weren't with you as well?
Yeah. The one advantage of COVID, and even before COVID, we talk a lot. So we have a family Zoom every single weekend where as many of us as possible can get together. And when we're all together, there's 7, 8 screens. No, there's more. Anyway, it fills the screen. And we've worked through a lot of this. And every now and then it will come up. The really difficult subjects will come up. My parents have recognized and said, we realized that, how damaging that was. We are sorry for the hurt. They recognize it. And through, and every now and then we'll make a little joke about it. Like the other day, someone was talking about an anti-lockdown protest, and my mum said, anti-lockdown? My brother said, yeah, didn't she take care of us when we were kids? And it's like, we just sort of laugh about the fact that loads of random people looked after us and that our parents were never there. And I don't know how many families are able to still talk to each other and work through this stuff together, because it feels like over COVID, we've gone through group therapy every week talking about this stuff and going over the history and listening to each other respectfully and very emotionally sometimes, but understanding how hard it was. But at the same time, I think my parents haven't, they don't talk about how hard it was for them, because their priority now is to listen and be their parents to us and listen to how hard it was for us.
Yeah.
I think they are absolutely always choose family over church now. So they've changed their perspective, and I really appreciate that.
And that is so encouraging to hear that these healthy conversations can take place between families that have been through these experiences, because what a help that must be for you on your journey towards healing your separation anxiety and all of the other psychological effects that come from the experiences that you've had, and not just yourself, but your brothers, your sisters, your parents who have experienced their own forms of separation and trauma. And I just think it's so reassuring to hear that these conversations can take place between families. There's a lot to be said about this. And when we cover things like the troubled teen industry, and I say, oh, did you ever have a conversation with your parents about how bad things really were in this therapeutic program that you were sent to, which I just said again in little inverted commas, because they're not therapeutic in any sense. But some people say, yeah, I speak to my parents. We've spoken about all of it. Some people say my parents can't have that conversation because they can't deal with the guilt of knowing where they sent me. And then some people will say, well, my parents take no responsibility for what happened, so we don't really talk. There's low contact or no contact. The shunning that comes with the being disfellowshipped from the Jehovah's Witnesses and these subjects that we've covered a bit more extensively on the podcast than others. It starts to feel like there is no room to have these conversations, that families can't recover and they can't grow and maintain healthy relationships. But we had Ronit come on the show to talk about her memoir when she comes back, about her mum leaving to go and follow Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh to India and then over to America. And Ronit's memoir was kind of this big ball of confusion about why her mum didn't want to be with her when she was kind of 5, 6 growing up, why they had to grow up with their father who had divorced from their mother. And then when I interviewed her mum was actually upstairs and they were about to go and have breakfast together. Her sister had come over. So that was another really nice example for me of how these traumatic experiences don't have to mean that the relationships between families will never be there, that these conversations can never happen. And that sounds as if that's something that's also happening with you and your family, and that has to be encouraging for some of the listeners.
Yeah. And I think it's my parents have made that conscious choice, because they've had to watch each one of us leave church one by one and had to decide, I love my child more than the church. And especially when the grandchildren come along, according to the doctrine, the grandchildren are spawn of Satan, but you can't hold that thought in a head and love your grandchild. So I think it's a gradual process, and probably a lot of parents are going through this now, as a lot of second generation are finding alternatives to keeping the faith. And I hope there are a lot of conversations like this where parents can recognize that their children have made choices at an age where they are older than the choice their parent made when they joined the church. So parents joined the church at 2021 and their kid is now 36 making choices. Like, why can't you respect that choice is valid, more valid than choice? You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people are having to come around to that because they want their relationship with their children.
Mm-hmm. And when you say that the grandchildren are seen as the spawn of Satan, is that because they are not, they're coming from marriages that aren't blessed by Reverend Moon?
Yeah, I mean, they aren't. No, I don't think anyone actually thinks that. But according to the doctrine, the worst sin possible is for a blessed child to lose their lineage, because Satan will invade and claim that lineage. So then the worst result of that is a child that has come from a fallen blessed child, right. You know, so lineage, according to the doctrine, is tainted. I'm sure they've created a forgiveness ceremony where everyone can come back and where they can now claim those children back as third generation if they want, you know. But at the time when I was making these difficult choices, I fully believed that a child born of a fallen blessed child was going to be in worse place than in hell than Adam and Eve. You know, that's what we were told.
And Reverend Moon he's not alive anymore. So is it his wife, Mrs. Moon, doing all the matching ceremonies now?
I think it's now parents doing matching. So it went for a while. So when I was matched, so in 1997, he was doing matching by photograph. So I sent him my picture. He lined all the pictures up on a wall and went around. All the boys were lined up on the wall and the girls were in his hand. And he went round, paired them up, and someone stapled them together. So that's how I was matched to my husband at the time. Then he... Then it changed so that parents could then arrange the matches and he would then do the mass wedding. And then after a few years of that, it wasn't going very well. So then the Reverend Moon took back on the matching of people and got everyone in a room together and was pairing people up. And I watched one of these and he was holding a flower in his hand that he'd picked from a bouquet. And he was tapping people on the head with a flower and going, boy, girl, matched, done. And then they'd go out the room. Next, boy, like it seemed so flippant. And I was really annoyed because when I was running workshops and events, before any event, you start with a prayer, right? This is just the standard. You all get together, someone says a prayer, and God is in the room. He didn't even start the matching with a prayer. And I was like, hey, is he really taking this seriously? So there were lots of children a few years younger than me. So sort of this was in the early 2005, I think, when he was doing all this. And then it went back to the parents for a bit. And now after he died, I don't know what the process is. I'm that far away.
I just can't believe that you would walk into a room and have somebody just go, you and you and you and you. And that's supposed to be the person that you are destined to spend your life with and to help build this heaven on earth and to help to surely there must be in that moment and we'll talk about this with your matching. Surely there has to be a moment where somebody thinks it can't be that easy. Surely I don't just walk into a room and a man comes up to me and says, boy, girl, you together forever, you will spend your lives together forever and that's the way it's going to be. And you are God's will.
Yeah, no, well, I believe it. The thing is, we're told that God has already chosen your partner from the time you're born. And all Reverend Moon does is he follows instructions from God. So it's not really his head doing it. It's God telling him. So quick. And some people have said they've seen the spiritual auras in the room where there's like a golden thread between two people, and then Reverend Moon will tap them both on the head. So it's like they've seen in advance God's signal, you know. So there's all kind of spiritual reinforcement of all of this. But other times he's given in speeches where he said, I'm an amazing matchmaker. I can see your ancestors and your lineage and your history, and I can pay, you know. So it's a mix of God and the Reverend. Mm-hmm. But it seems very random. And of all the people in my blessing, I don't know the exact statistics, but I know 3 who are still together out of the few hundred that I know. And later on, when parents got involved, those were a little bit more successful because there was obviously a relationship beforehand and a conversation and a bit of more of a decision by the kids themselves. But yeah, it's been crazy.
Of course there is spiritual reinforcement. If there was no spiritual reinforcement, then people wouldn't become so far engrossed in the church. So when I was thinking how could somebody stand in a room and think that this is plausible, that this person is my life partner and God's will for me to carry on his work on earth, then of course people must believe that at that point, because you wouldn't get to that point if there wasn't all of these answers for all of these questions before you get to that stage. It's kind of like with Scientology, where you enter at the low level and it's all like Dianetics kind of makes sense on a basic life how to live and you know, kind of be okay. And then as you go up the levels, it gets a bit stranger. And then when you get to these top levels that people pay all this money to unlock, they realize that it's all to do with aliens and really
but by then you're so far in
that you accept it.
And the community and the connection and the value and the cognitive dissonance and all of those things. And you know, you can see, that's a really good example. You see how it gradually people get swept into a certain way of thinking. And that by then, yeah, anything's plausible. I mean, we were told, I can't even think of the examples, but crazy message would come like, oh, you all have to give £120 for this new thing. And we're all like, oh, is that what we do? Okay, you know, without thinking, how is my money affecting that spiritual thing you've just spoken of? And why do you need my money again when surely there is so much sloshing around at the top? You know, you just don't ask those questions.
And but just quickly going back to that spawn of Satan thing that we mentioned about the grandchildren. Again, there must be that whole thing about grandparents that are still involved in the church have to try to, if their grandchild has been born outside of the lineage, they have to then have that strange battle in their own mind about whether they stay true to the church and don't have much of a relationship with the grandchild, or biologically want to spend time with the child and bond with them because of that familial love that comes from outside of the church. So again, there must be that, because my mum is besotted with her grandchildren, and I imagine that's the same for all grandparents. So to have that fight within themselves over their faith and their grandchildren, it must just be a whole tangle of difficult conversations with themselves.
But do you know what I just realized? When my siblings were leaving the church, so I believed that Satan had got them, but I still really wanted to hang out with my sister. So somewhere in my head, I justified, if I have a good relationship with her, she might eventually come back to the church through me. So it's important that we stay on good terms. So I need to hang out with her and go to the pub with her and like do all this stuff with her, even though it's in the satanic world. And of course, I love my sister and I wanted to hang out with her, but my Mooney brain, the only way I could shut it up was saying, we need to maintain this relationship so that we can bring her back one day. So it's a really interesting question of how an indoctrinated brain can reconcile those two things. And yeah, I found a way.
It's almost then you're doing to yourself what Reverend Moon has done to you by saying,
yes.
suppress all of these all of this critical thinking that you're having, and all of this doubt, and don't look too closely at these red flags and just follow your faith, because your faith is the most important thing. But then you're kind of not doing those things by hanging out with your sister who's left the church, and you're like, do you know what, I'm gonna go and have a relationship with my sister and go and do things like go to the pub and maybe things that would be frowned upon, but I am doing them because that's what Reverend Moon would want me to do. So it's weird because we're going around in this big circle.
It's basically, you can justify anything by saying it's got a providential reason, as Teddy and Jen have explained how some early sexual shenanigans have been explained through providential reasons. Like, my own brain was doing it. Like, I can break the rules on this occasion because it's for the sake of my sister eventually, maybe. Like, yes, interesting how the brain works.
And I've made a note here in my questions to you that when you were living in Ivy House and you talked about aunts and uncles, I was like, is this like as family members, or just like where you say my brothers and my sisters, and is that the same with aunties and uncles? Because my dad's best friend is my uncle, but we're not actually related.
Yeah, I was like that. Everyone was an uncle and auntie. I had Trinidadian aunties and Japanese uncles, and like a whole international world of uncles and aunties. And in my experience, I know this isn't everyone's, but they were all really lovely, and I was so grateful for their care. And they, not just because it was their mission to look after the blessed children, but they really cared about us. And I've seen the schedule for the staff during that house. So we had our wake up, morning service, breakfast, school, all of this, bedtime. And then they had staff meetings, and they sometimes did these 4-hour prayers throughout the night. And some of them still had to go fundraising in the pubs that evening. Like, they were still being active members while looking after the children. And so they were really tired, and also like away from their own children. You know, it was just really, really hard for them. But I only ever felt cared for. There may be other experiences, and maybe the younger children had a worse experience, because by then we were school age kids. So we could sort of play with each other and hang out and that kind of thing. But all my uncles and aunties were really lovely.
That's great as well. There always has to be parts of these stories that feel wholesome and nice. Otherwise, I don't think I could do these interviews as often as I do. Even if it's just somebody says, I had one friend when I was growing up and I could tell them anything I wanted to, and they never went and told any of that information to any of the priests or whoever the leaders or the elders or whoever's in charge. Just those time, like those people in these stories that we hear all of the time are probably more often than not, or more often than they realize, lifesavers in some situations. You know, so we do have to always take a minute, I think, during these episodes to recognize that. And again, there must be so much conflict in a person's mind. You've probably experienced this, where you kind of take a step back from the church and start to think about all of those people that have touched your life and impacted you in some way, and think about their personal story and what they must have gone through. I think there's a word for this. You know, when you're sitting in a cafe or a McDonald's or wherever, and you're watching people walk past, and you're starting to look at every single person that walks past and thinks, wow, they've got their own life with their own family, their own friends, and they've had all these experiences and they've lived all these years, and there's like hundreds of people walking past, and you're like, whoa, overwhelmed with like all of this. I think it's called Sonder. If I'm wrong, somebody please get in touch and let me know, but I'm pretty sure it's called Sonder. So you've probably had this moment where you've sat back and thought, wow, this is my experience. So all of these other parents that were caring for us at the time, who couldn't be with their children, who are probably grieving those relationships and trying to battle their relationship with the church, but also push down all of these wants and needs that they have around their family, and you've probably thought your parents have experienced this as well, so it must be really overwhelming to not only sit back and try and work through your upbringing and all of the things that you experienced, but also all of those people that you were surrounded by who have probably also felt the same way at some point.
Yeah, it's what's interesting is that there is a different traumatic story, and also the stories of love and connection for everyone who was, especially at Ivy House. I mean, this house has so much significance for anyone who grew up in the church. And I met up with one of the main aunties who looked after me when I was there. I met up with her years later for a coffee, and all she wanted to do was say sorry, to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, it was so hard for you, and I'm sorry I couldn't love you enough, and your mum wasn't there. And I was like, oh my God, all I ever felt was love from you. Like I needed to tell her that she'd done an amazing job, and I was really grateful. And she was suffering because she could see us suffering and our parents, so she could understand every perspective, as well as her children being there, but in the different nurseries. Like, she had it so, I want to say she had it worse than us, but my sister will say, yeah, but we were children and we were victims, and at least the adults had a choice. And it's an area for discussion. But
yeah,
I think as a parent, there is an ability for empathy and understanding of someone else's suffering in a way that I, as a 5-7-year-old kid, didn't. Basically, my older sister was sort of my surrogate mum through that whole time. She looked after all of us, and so she didn't have a childhood as much as we did, because she was looking after the rest of us while we were without our parents in this weird situation. So we're just a year and a half apart. She has a very different experience than me growing up there.
I think as well, when parentification is involved in these situations, there is a different kind of resentment and a different kind of trauma that a lot of people would struggle to understand. So I think Ronit talks well about this in her memoir when she comes back, because she had a younger sister that she almost became the surrogate mother for, because they were living with just their father whilst their mum was with Rajneesh. So it was interesting to read through her work, and she started growing resentment towards her father, because she was thinking, why am I in this role? Why am I in this position? This is not my role. I should be being taken care of. I should be loved. Why is there nobody doing the things for me that I'm having to do by default for my younger siblings? So it's anybody that's been through that experience, I think it's very different for them. So that's why your experiences are probably vastly, and your memories are probably very different to your sister as well, even though you're quite close together in age, and the way you remember things, I'm sure you have conflicted debates on how things really happened, or when things really happened. And when you sat down with that auntie to talk through that experience, and she was so intensely apologetic about your experience, I wonder if that is her almost projecting some of her thoughts and feelings around her own family, and how sorry she was for the situation that her own kids went through, and kind of maybe having half of that discussion with you that hopefully she's also having with her own children as well, just the amount of times she said sorry and how apologetic she was about the whole situation.
I think you're probably right, because her own children were in the same situation. I think pretty much every parent in the British church has gone through that, some level of separation from their children, either at Ivy House or other places.
And at some point, the responsibility that your mum and dad have within the church changes, and you relocate for a short while.
So the Ivy House nursery changed. It shut down in 88, And then my parents were given leadership of a centre in London, and we all got to live with them. So we were so excited to all be together as a family. We weren't completely together because my older brother at that point went off to Korea to do this GOT program that we can talk about later. But we were with our parents, but also with a load of other members, and they were very busy with the mission, and we were there, but we were definitely not the priority. And I think a lot of children go through this where the parents are working really hard, any business, teacher, whatever jobs the parents have, there's often a lot of devoting time and energy to the job and not making time for the children. And because in our house there were loads of other aunties and uncles, there were other people to take care of us anyway. So my parents, who had quite senior responsibilities, could go off and do the meetings and the workshops and all of that and know that we were being taken care of. So we were together, but in a slightly stressful situation.
And how did your educational situation change at that point? Because I know that London it's very multicultural. There's a lot of different practicing religions in very small confined spaces of London. So one school could have 8 to 10 different religions being practiced by the pupils individually. So how was that going from the small school in Wiltshire over to London, where the culture is very, very diverse?
Yeah, that was actually, that element of it was easier because I felt like I fitted in because everyone had a different religion. Some of my friends had to pray 5 times a day or wear a headscarf or whatever, and I suddenly felt like I wasn't the odd one out. But at the same time, I changed schools 3 times in the 2 years there. So we were always new, like Jen was saying, she was the new kid every time. And we moved within London, moved around again. So my education was all right because one of the things about us, or at least my generation, was we had a really strong discipline for doing well at school and doing your homework and being good. So I always did well at school in my classes. I didn't do well with socializing with friends. That's an ongoing story. But yeah, we moved about a bit and it was disrupted a bit, but we all did all right at school. And actually all of us 6 who grew up in England all went on to get degrees. So academically, that was all right. Socially, we were all over the place, but
I wonder why that is. A lot of it, I imagine, comes down to the wariness of interacting with people outside of the church, or a lot of the time that we've heard stories on the show about, if you are going to interact with people outside of your religion, then it should be because you're trying to bring them into the religion. So again, like if somebody came up to me when I was younger, or even now, and said, "Hey, let's be friends, but come and join my church," I'd be a bit like, I'd love to chat more, but just not about your religion.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that has something to do with it.
Well, there was that, but there was also, we had our little group of blessed children across London, and when we were in London, the different centres, and there were a few people living at home with their families, we'd all get together on a Saturday for what was called Shimjong Club, which was where all the blessed children got together. And this is when I began to realise that there were some children in the church who were not blessed children. They were Jacob's children, like Lisa's experience. And they didn't come to Shimjong Club. And there was like this separation. Don't let the Jacob's children mix with the blessed children. And my mum, she fought really hard against that and made sure that all the children were included together and treated the same. So credit to my mum for that. But the understanding in the church was that the blessed children were the precious ones, and they needed the educating and the keeping safe and all of that. So we had a really strong social life at the weekends, including also the big Sunday pledge service at the headquarters every Sunday at 5:00. So we'd all be there, the whole of London church, and holy days and all these celebrations. So although I wasn't doing well socially at school, I had a really close-knit group of friends from the church outside of school.
And that's the safety net around these insular communities that we discuss a lot around when people decide or start to think about moving away from their group or movement or religion or church, start to think about how do you build a new community or a new support group from scratch when everybody you know is within that insular community that you don't want to maybe associate with anymore? And that is like a whole other can of worms entirely, I imagine, when it comes to thinking about how you take a step back. I'm sure in your situation it may have been slightly different because, as you said, you have older siblings who, by the time you made that decision, had already made that decision.
Yeah, actually, yeah. And I joined in their circles of friends. So like I had my brothers and sisters, groups of friends to hang out with and go to the pub with. And yeah, without that, it would have taken a lot longer for me to get out of the church because they were already there and they did the hard work, really.
It's just incredible to think about all of this, because the us versus them part of Stephen Hassan's bite model that I often go back to, that I know is not always the model that is widely used within the ex-Unification Church members, for reasons that ex-Unification Church members will know. But there's so much of it within this particular group. You've got the us versus them, people in the church, people outside of the church. Us versus them, Jacob's children and blessed children. Us versus them, blessed children and the actual children of Reverend Moon. And then you've got like people that were paired by Moon himself, people that were paired in blessing ceremonies. It's like so many. The way that it's all happened is there's so many different pots of things, and it's almost keeps you all at keeping each other at arm's length, because everybody is a them. Like there is no true us within the Unification Church, because there's so many groups to be wary of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, definitely the biggest us and them is in the church and out of the church. And there was a real fear and a wariness. Like, don't go too far into the outside world and don't hang out with the fallen children. And like, definitely a lot of fear. It's like that film The Village, where, have you seen that? And it's just, don't go out. It's all bad and scary out there. And you get there and you're like, oh, it's just actually not a man in a costume. It's actually lovely people who are nicer and genuine than those in the church, and they don't even believe in God. So they're not doing it out of fear. They're doing it because they're just nice people. Like, it takes a while to get there and get comfortable with it, but it is about realizing that the outside world isn't bad.
And you go through school, you have this kind of hectic few years where you're not very settled, you're moving all over the place, and you're there's kind of this state of upheaval and big transitions and change in your life, from going from this kind of stable community life in Wiltshire over to this new hectic life in London. But then there are some points where you do travel outside of England and have some different experiences as you get a bit older.
Yeah. So the two main experiences which I realized as I was thinking about this talk was all my most churchy experiences were not in England. They were in Korea and America. So when I was 13, I went to the GOP program in Korea, which is where 100 blessed children from around the world were put together. GOP is General Orientation Program, and we were there to learn the heavenly tradition of Korea, to learn the culture and history of the church, like going to all these historical sites, going to the places where Reverend Moon prayed and got revelations and early church stuff, all of that. And then after a year of that, you are prepared enough to go into actual Korean school with the Korean students, which was really hard because I hadn't picked up enough Korean in a year to cope with high school level Korean lessons. But that experience in Korea was so intensely moonifying. Like, we were surrounded by blessed children from around the world, which was really exciting and fun and amazing. And it was also the first time for me to be without my family. So at first I was massively homesick and without my siblings, and I really missed my sister especially, and I really wanted to go home. But then I realized I had a whole new group of brothers and sisters. And this is where I began, I think, to separate a bit from my family, because I became super churchy and quite judgy of them, of my siblings back home who were leaving the faith. And when I came back, I was on a mission to save them and to be this really good Mooney kid who was going to stay pure and keep my lineage sacred until the blessing, till my eventual marriage. So that's when I began to split off from my family a bit. And when I came back, they were all going to secondary school that I was going to before. But to keep myself pure, someone had a revelation, and I went along with it, that I should go to a different school 7 miles away. So I was, again, a new kid in another school, away from my siblings, away from my previous friends, in order to be like socially rubbish, but spiritually really good. And academically, it was all right. But it was this incredible like connection with all these other blessed children from around the world was really intoxicating and really powerful. And it was out of loyalty to them and everything that we had learned in Korea that I was determined to keep my spiritual faith when I got back.
I think I mentioned in my email to you as well that there was somebody I spoke to. This episode that I'm about to reference now will have already been released by the time this one comes out. But I spoke to a gentleman named Lonnie, who was he's an ex-member of an Orthodox Judaism, and he spoke about how some people from his religion would go over to Israel for a set amount of time, and they always used to joke, oh, will they come back super devoted, and they had a word for it, but I can't remember off the top of my head, but they would say, oh, do you think they're going to come back as one of these really devout Jewish people? And when I read through your email to me explaining what happened when you went over to Korea, I was like, oh my goodness, it's the same thing. And I remember Teddy speaking to me about some of the experiences that he had in these camps that I know you also experienced when you went over to America, that hopefully we'll speak about next. But it was so interesting because I was like, wow, these places really exist where they send these children to be surrounded by nothing but the doctrine and practices and prayer sessions, that when they come home, all they want to do is bring other people into the fold or strengthen other people's belief if they are already involved in the church.
Yeah, that was exactly it. I was doing prayer conditions. I don't know if you've heard about this thing, conditions, where you offer a certain amount of time. You do something like a cold shower or fasting or praying. And I did an 80-day, 21-minute prayers before the date of coming home to prepare myself to be that mega Mooney. That's what I was, to like evangelize to my family. And the day that I got back, my brother and sister took me to the bottom of the garden and was like, right, it won't be long before we get our sister back. We'll slap all that Mooney stuff out of you shortly. So there was this conflict that they were trying to get me back as their sister. And I was like, no, I have to save your souls. So it was a difficult time for all of us.
And then you did go over to America, and how was that experience different from the one that you had in Korea?
So what happened was, when I got back from Korea, I really missed all my friends in Korea. So I was writing to them all the time, and they got together and paid for my ticket to go to New York for this 70-day workshop. So I'd heard about this camp where all the blessed children would go every summer, and I was so excited to go and see especially the older brothers and sisters who were like legendary, all these names I'd heard of. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I know Jen was talking about the hell training with the unity jumping jacks and running in the middle of the night and all this crazy stuff. For me, because I really craved that sense of belonging and meaning and purpose, I was tired and I was in pain and I didn't like doing press-ups on my knuckles on the ground in the gravel, but the sense of belonging was just amazing for me. And to be part of this amazing community, there was about 120 of us there. And Reverend Moon even came to visit the camp that year, because it was like the highest concentration of blessed children in America at the time. And because I really craved that sense of belonging, for me it worked. And at the end of that workshop, I said, right, I'm going to go back to England, and not just my family. I'm going to be the leader and savior for all the blessed children, all the little ones. They need this inspiration. They need to feel the spirit. I want to go back and be this leader for them. And someone said, oh no, well, if you want to be a leader, you've got to do 1 year leadership training, and that'll be the STF Special Task Force program that we've just started. So this was 95 to 96. And it was a few years before Jen's experience, and she talked about how it was really intense fundraising and like proper labor trafficking, to use that word. My year, it was a lot more witnessing, so going up on universities and talking to people and trying to recruit them and bring them to church events. So it was a mix of witnessing and fundraising, and that was like we were told, it was to understand our parents' course, because our parents have all done that fundraising and witnessing. So for us to do a year of it, we were lucky we only had to do a year, because they had to do 7 years. And during that time, I got fully inspired to be this great savior of England, which was quite arrogant to think that I could just come to England and save everyone because I'd had a few nice workshops in America. But at the time, I was getting told, you're the oldest British blessed child still in the church. You've got to do something, because the ones older than you have all left. All the pressure is on you, Miriam. You've got to save England. Okay, I'll save England, And I was 17 at the time. So it messed up my A-levels completely. So after my GCSEs, I went to America, and I was supposed to come back for my A-levels. So that all got pushed back. I was already a year behind anyway. It put me back 2 years, my education. But when I came back, I was totally on fire, and I was running these workshops for the little kids and telling them all the stuff I'd learned in America, and basically filling them with fear and all the scary stuff of, your lineage is so precious, don't you dare mess it up. If you do, we'll all go to hell, and England will be in trouble, and not just your family, but the whole country, and Satan will invade. All this stuff I came back with. And if any of them are listening now, I want to apologize for perpetuating this fear that was drummed into me. I just came back and spewed it back out at them.
That's what I was going to say, though. You're only perpetuating the fear that's already been perpetuated to you in these workshops, in this conditioned environment that is purposefully done in a way that you will go home and have those conversations with people. So obviously it's important to recognize that that these things have happened, but also important to cut ourselves some slack and realize that those things are done that way on purpose, in a very meticulous way, so that you'll come and proselytize to everybody and scare others how you've been scared.
So that's what I was trained to do. We were trained to give lectures and to teach the truth. And for me, I genuinely believed that I had to protect them, and that if I didn't, that they would end up in a bad place and blame me, and it would be my fault if bad things happened to them. I mean, do you know in Lord of the Rings where Frodo's carrying the ring, and I don't know if it's Sam talks to him about the strawberries back at the Shire, and he goes, there are no strawberries, it's just the ring. And it was like, that's how I felt. Like, we can't do frivolous fun things. We've got this serious, intense mission, and I'm carrying it because I'm the oldest one in England. And like, it wasn't for the glory. It was for like serious responsibility that I couldn't get away from. That's what it felt like.
And I imagine that each time you had one of these sessions with these children, they went away feeling confused and scared, or maybe even empowered like you felt, but you probably also walked away like, yes, I've done my job today. I feel great. I feel really good in myself because I'm carrying out my mission.
Yeah. And definitely like at the end of these, so we had a workshop every half term or holiday, so 6 times a year, get all the kids together at Ivy House, which is now an educational centre, or a different house in London. And at the end of it, they would write their little reflection book. And so many of them said, I don't want to go back to school and have to hang out with kids in the fallen world, because I feel so safe and loved here. I feel like I'm accepted, that I can be honest, that everyone understands me. Because as a blessed child in a school on your own, it's very lonely. To get together with everyone is like, it's that huge bubble of love, which comes with a huge responsibility. So again, they were willing to take on that responsibility of being a blessed child in return for this sense of belonging and community. And I'm sure there's a lot more stories of the children who I lectured and preached at, what it was like from their perspective. But from mine, like you said, at the end of each workshop, me and the other staff would just be like, oh my God, we did it. And we didn't sleep. Like the whole time I was sort of on 3 or 4 hours sleep per night. So exhausting. And of course, so much suffering, clocking up all that suffering for God. Like,
yeah,
it's brownie points. And then I'd have to like write an essay about James Joyce or whatever for my A-levels. It was like trying to do so much that year.
The sleep deprivation, I know, is something that when I was first getting into the subject of new religious movements, cults, high demand religious groups, whatever phrase people want to apply to these groups that we speak about. And I first came across Stephen Hassan, and it really stuck out to me when he was talking about the sleep deprivation, when he crashed the car, the van that led to him having to stay in hospital, which led to him being able to have some space to sleep and think, and then realize that maybe things weren't what he thought they were. And I was thinking, wow, yeah, sleep deprivation must be a real thing. And then I had kids and I was like, oh my goodness, sleep deprivation is absolutely a thing. And I cannot imagine how people go through when they have these experiences, like with the labor trafficking, which was what Stephen Hassan was involved in when he was experiencing not having any sleep, and what we've heard Teddy speak about, what we've heard Jen and Lisa speak about, is that it's not just because from my perspective, it's just I have this baby that I need to look after, and the baby is not allowing me to get the sleep that I need, so I'm in survival mode. But then when we hear these stories, we're hearing, I haven't had enough sleep, but I have to go out and carry out this mission, and I have to go out and make this much money, and I have to go out and be responsible for this team of people, and then we have to go here, and then we have to drive there, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. So it's not just like me and this baby, and that's our world right now. It's all these other responsibilities and things that is so it doesn't even give you a chance to be like, I know I'm not having any sleep. You don't even get a chance to realize what's happening almost, because there's all these other things that keep you in like a whirlwind of chaos.
Yeah, and always so tired. So I remember every time I was on public transport, like when I was on my STF mission year, if I was in a van or traveling anywhere, that's the only time I had for thinking and like staring out the window and reflecting and going, what is it that we're doing? And then immediately you fall asleep. So like anytime you've got to sit still and think was just, you're so exhausted. You're like, I've got 20 minutes. Oh my God, I can sleep. Like always so tired. But then coming back to England in the workshops, I was the one that was creating a schedule that was right. We're going to get up at 5. All the staff are going to pray for half an hour before the other kids wake up. And then after the kids have gone to sleep at 10, we're going to have a staff meeting till midnight to go through the schedule and make sure we, so I was the one sleep depriving everyone. And then once the staff had gone to sleep, I would stay up doing more prayers for the kids and like worrying about the next day, But at the same time, that prayer, I remember the sort of 2 a.m. prayer, walking around outside, and you can see the house, Ivy House again, and all the blessed children are in the house sleeping safe, and I'm outside praying with God, and I'm like we're protecting these children, Heavenly Father. Like, I was so believing in my importance of what I was doing. And there was quite a special moment. You feel like you're one with God. You're like, me and God, yeah, we're a team. We're sorting out the future of this country. And to carry that thought in your head, and then later on to realize it was all bullshit and to let go of it, it's a process of untangling, because it's so powerful to believe that's what you're doing.
And it's not long after this trip to America that you actually do end up having your own matching ceremony.
Yes. So I was 19, it's 1997, and I knew the date of my blessing a year in advance. So 29th of November, 1997. And I had been writing to my future husband since I was 15, because of course I was falling in love with every boy who talked to me, which weren't many, because out of the Mooney boys, they didn't talk to me. So in Korea, I was just obsessed with this one boy who we would look at each other in the reflection of the piano at the front of the class. Like, that was the extent of our relationship. But I was like, oh my God, I love him. But of course, I couldn't speak to him. So I started to write to my future husband, like, dear future husband, I will keep pure for you, and I will count down the days until I'm allowed to be married to you, because all I can think about is you. And I got obsessed with this imaginary person, so that when I finally got his name and his picture, he was someone I knew from America. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm so in love. I'm absolutely head over heels in love. And the day I found out was November the 5th, which in England is a day full of fireworks. And I was on a bus and there were fireworks going off in every direction. And I was just like, so happy, so excited. Finally made it to the blessing. I had a husband that I would be allowed to hold his hand and kiss and like hug. I hadn't done anything with any boys my whole life. Like I said, I was a very good super moony girl, and I was finally going to be allowed to have a man in my life. And he was happy with the match. He wasn't like over the moon insane like I was. He was like, yeah, cool, this is nice, you know, like. So we talked on the phone. But did I mention I spent a year in America? And to do that, you need a visa, which I didn't have. So when I tried to get into America for my mass wedding, which was in Washington, the US Embassy wouldn't let me in. So I attended my mass wedding by satellite link up from London, where there was a little group of us holding photos, all the other girls with immigration problems. And all the British members were in the headquarters of London. So it was like a big event. And I was at the front with a few brides holding this photo of my husband. and that was my wedding day. And it was crazy. So we finally did, we spoke a lot on the phone, me and my husband at the time. And we met up in Canada. And the lovely Canadian church, this is the thing about being a Moonie, is there are people all over the world. You just phone up the church centre and you're like, I'm a blessed child, I've just got blessed, me and my husband need somewhere to meet. Oh, okay. And they arranged for us to stay in True Parents' house in Canada, which was really special, because as blessed children, our union was like sacred. So they facilitated a really lovely like honeymoon for me and my husband in along this lake near Toronto. It was just beautiful. So I was head over heels in love. We were learning about sex as we went along, because obviously no one had taught us, and we'd just seen things from films. So it was exploratory. He was really considerate and thoughtful, and I have a lot of respect for him for the way that he was as good to me as he could be, even though he didn't believe in pretty much any of it. So I stayed in England. He was still in America doing his university. We visited a few times. But then after 3 years, he was like, I need to end this. We need to end it. And I said, no, we can't end it. I know you're pissed off with me because I do a lot of crying. I was doing a lot of crying. Did I mention I've got attachment issues? And he was, the other side of the ocean from me. So I was doing that whole abandonment stuff with him. And he was just like, this isn't working for me and we need to end it. And I couldn't accept it, because in my head, he was chosen by God. He was my only option as a husband. I had invested 3 years in him, and like, I'd waited for 3 years because finally he was going to finish university and I could move to America and we were going to get married and do it properly. And he was like, no, over. And I tried to fight it, but he said, look, you're a Mooney and I'm not. And if we have kids, I won't let them do the ceremonies and you'll want them to. And you need to find yourself a Mooney boy. And it was really thoughtful and considerate the way he ended it. Of course, in my head, I was just like, oh my God, heartbreak, abandonment and distress and trauma. And it took me quite a while to get over that. But in getting over him, I started to unravel the doctrine. So in order to let go of this one husband chosen by God thing, I had to open my mind a bit and go, oh, well, maybe there are other options. And maybe this whole lineage thing could be, if I could marry another blessed child, then he's not my only one. So maybe the lineage isn't that sacred. But all the boys I tried to go with, I kept getting really, really panicky about not getting a blessed child. So I tried to have a few boyfriends, but the guilt would kick in like as soon as there was anything vaguely physical. And I realized I was just never going to be able to let go of this fear of breaking the lineage. So it took a while. So it was till I was about 31. So now this is 7 years after that ended. And I tried with a few different blessed children, and eventually after 31 attempts, because by now parents were matching. So I was talking to my parents and going, could you give a call to that guy's parents? Oh no, they said no. Okay, well, that guy's parents have phoned us. What do you think? Oh no, he's, so it was all this, everyone was trying to chuck a husband at me. And I was like, no, I want that one. Oh no, he's taken. Like, and there were not many in this international pool of people my age. And then the Reverend Moon started doing face-to-face matching again. And I was 27. And I thought, my gosh, this is my last chance to get a blessed child boy. So I went in the room with all these girls on one side and boys on the other. And because I was secondhand blessed child, so basically because I'd already been blessed, I had a red dot on my name badge, which meant secondhand. So we all had name badges, but I had a sticky dot. And because I had started family, which means I had had sex within my blessing, I had a second red dot, which meant like secondhand and contaminated goods. So I was in a really, really unpopular category. And so Reverend Moon did all the respectful 18, 19-year-olds, and they were very, very serious about their matching. And he matched them all off. And then he said, right, secondhand people, I'm sure he used a better term than that. And I was like, okay, God, do I need to do this or not? I really don't want to, I'm not sure if I'm going to do this. And then the intercontinental leader for Britain came up to me, grabbed my arm and said, Miriam, this is your chance. And he basically put me in front of Reverend Moon. So I'm standing there and he's looking at me and he's about to choose me a husband. But I think at this point, they didn't have any men in my category. So I didn't even look. I was just focusing at the front and I was going, oh my God, Heavenly Father, is this really happening? You're going to get me a husband now. And the man who stood next to me, I didn't see him, but the whole room started laughing. And one of the Koreans shouted, he's 17, Father. And Father looked at me and was like, oh, really? But how old are you? And I held up my name badge and I'm like, I'm 27. Like it says on my name badge, I'm 27. And he was like, oh. And he looked at me, looked at him, and then he just went with his hand and just flicked me away. And after that, I sat down and I laughed and I was like, that's it. The Messiah has pushed me away. I can now find my own boy. Do you know what I mean? I was like, that is the sign from God that I needed. You don't need this room full of lineage anymore. Go, go, go. And I needed that in order to finally let go. I could just see your face now going, what?
So he didn't pair you with the 17-year-old. He just told you to leave.
Yeah, well, we were going to be paired. We were stood next to each other. But when he realized the age difference was 10 years, he was like, that won't work. You can go. So I don't know if he was going to try and match me again. By then, there were very few people in the room. And I was the dregs. I knew I was the dregs anyway of this barrel of us children. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to belittle it, because there will be other people in a similar situation who were heartbroken that they didn't get a match. But for me, I was so relieved, because I was like, do I need to do this or not? And then to me, that was a sign, oh, no, you don't. And my flight to Korea, it stopped in Paris for a changeover. And I actually just got off at Paris. And because there was a boy in Paris that I knew, and I phoned him up. I was like, hi, I'm now single and I'm in Paris. So shall we, And it didn't work with him. But that began my gradual, it was still 3 years before I actually managed to cross the line with someone. But after that, I went online dating, and I had to go on Match.com because, I'd been brought up to go for the matching. So Match.com was my choice. And it was 31. I was 31 when I finally lost my lineage to a man I met on the internet.
That is such an incredible story. I can't believe you just after being so regimented and so devout for so long, just got off the plane at Paris, threw your arms in the air and said, you know what, I'm not even going to get on my connecting flight. I'm just going to stay here in Paris. Like that, the difference there in 5 years between like that Miriam and the Miriam that, like, imagine 5 years before that happened, just getting off a plane in Paris, not knowing where you were going to go, where you were going to stay, or any of those things. Like that to me just feels like you never would have been able to do that. And then you just said, you know what, I'm just going to stop here. I'm going to stop here in Paris for a bit.
I was so relieved, because there was so much pressure to, like, this. They were saying this might be one of Reverend Moon's last matching. This will be your only chance. And there was so much pressure, and everyone telling me I should go for it. And I was just like, I need a sign from God. And the sign from God was, no, you don't need to. You don't need to do this. So, but I mean, it took me a while. It was still 3 more years. So I went out with boys, and they were very patient. God bless them. And I was like, I've come from a weird religion. I've got a lot of hang-ups. I probably won't sleep with you. So it took several very patient men and several years before, for some reason, and I'll tell you why. It was because I was watching documentaries on Jonestown when I was 30, and I realized, so I was watching the guy, Jim Jones, giving his speech, and he was so compelling and so charismatic, and I was watching him and going, oh yeah, maybe God was working through, maybe he had the right, oh my God, Miriam, what are you? And I could see my brain lapping up his bullshit just like I had everything else. And I was like, you see what you have done. You see how easy it is. You could have been lapped up by any of these cults. And I watched them all on the internet, and I was like, it's just a cult, Miriam, just let go. But it was the fear of being a bad person and letting everyone down, letting my parents, letting down all these little kids who had looked up to me, and all the aunties and uncles who'd looked after me, like such a community of people that I was letting down. But finally, I was like, I have to find a man, and I'm not finding one inside the church. And God, you've just got to just let me find a man. And it was like spiritual suicide, because once a blessed child has sex outside of the blessing, you've lost your lineage, and that means you are now no longer a blessed child, which means all the pressure is gone. So for me, it was gone, and then it was terrifying. I had no idea the panic attacks and how much shaking and crying my brain would put me through for losing my lineage. But then I know my brain had been hardwired for 30 years before then, that this was the worst thing possible, and if I did it, I'd be going to hell, and all my descendants and all my family, and I believed that I had unleashed a curse on everyone I loved. I didn't believe it, but my body did, and it was sent me into like just retching panic attacks and like constant trembling. And my sweet boyfriend at the time, he was like, I told him it might be a bit weird, but he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready for like the amount of crying and trembling. So yeah, traumatic for me leaving the church.
I imagine as well, reading Lisa's work must have resonated with you when she would speak about doing some things that the church wouldn't have agreed with, and then trying to kind of do things to get back on the right track spiritually. And I spoke to another interview I've done with a man named Athron, who is living over in Bali, and he grew up with a mum who was extremely devout, and he would have night terrors, and she would say, oh, the devil's inside you, have a demon inside you, we need to cast that demon out. So he'd stay up with his mum all night, and she'd be trying to cast this demon out of him. And so he didn't realize until later that the night terrors came because of him thinking that he had demons inside of him, or that he was inviting Satan in. And his mum would find albums like Nirvana albums and things, and she'd be like, oh, you've brought the devil into the house, and things like that. And so when he went on to start having sexual intercourse with a girl, his first girlfriend, who he really did truly love, he would then feel so guilty and be so overwhelmed with this feeling that he would then take himself, like he would try and baptize himself and do these rituals on his own to try and get himself back on the right track spiritually. Much like you're talking about with the guilt, and much like Lisa talks about in her work as well. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that when somebody is suffering psychologically with something, so when it's so visceral, that then presents itself often as a physical ailment. So somebody might be throwing up and think, I must have a bug. I've got a bug, but I'm extremely stressed about something, without realizing that psychological stress might be causing you to physically react by throwing up. So these panic attacks that you're feeling here, and trying to unravel all of this, I mean, still to this day is probably something that you're still working on, I imagine.
Yeah. So that was when I was 31. I'm 43 now, and so after that, I basically cult hopping is the thing that people do, and I found my next little cult was my Aikido group, and it wasn't deliberately culty at all, but it was a community, and I found myself bowing to a picture of an Asian man and doing the rituals and wearing white robes and speaking Japanese instead of Korean, and like all the little things about being in the cult, except it was with a group of really cool people, and we would go to the pub afterwards, and like people within the group were like having sex with each other, and it was like, oh my god, it's like the church but with no fear. It was so
flipped on its head.
Yeah. So that was one little community I found, and I was so grateful for we called each other Aiki brothers and sisters. It was really like such a little family. And I also joined a choir, because one of the things about the church that I really loved, and I always thought God was there, was in the singing, because you get a real sense of community and harmony when you sing together. And I thought it was the holy songs that was the magic. Actually, it's just a room of 50 people singing in harmony is just truly blissful. So I joined the choir, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is where God is. It's where anywhere where people are doing anything together, you get that sense of community and bonding and connection. So I very carefully filled my community gaps with that. And also I very obviously and without shame became a workaholic, and it was very good for any of the jobs I had during that time. My employers loved it, because I was just way above and beyond, working like early morning till late at night, the exemplary employee. And it took a while before my relationships began to unravel, and the self-destruction was coming in. So there was a long process of a dark time of being really self-sabotaging and finding relationships that would recreate the abandonment. So I found myself walking around under the trees at Ivy House, crying, saying, don't leave me, please don't leave me. over a man, but realizing it was still the voice of my little 5-year-old recreating abandonment, could feel that pain and try and fix it again. Because I know now that that's a thing that humans do, is recreate the trauma. So I did that for a few years with a few different people, mixing it up a bit. And then, like, the stupidest thing, when I was in one of my lowest points, Ivy House, which was now being run as a business that my parents were running, was no longer a church centre, but it was still owned by the church and being run as a venue. And my parents had been doing it for a few years. I was helping. And then I got the opportunity to run it myself. So something very, very, very powerful within me said, you need to run that business. You need to have Ivy House back. And the desire to run this business was not out of financial sense. It was not out of any kind of career choice. It was a deep and powerful childhood need to fix stuff that was broken in that house for me. So I ran this business for 3 years. And during that time, I thought that I had left the church. I thought that I was recovered from the church. But I found that when church members were in the house, because obviously it still belongs to the church and they're the landlord, that an incredible rage would like boil up in my neck. Like I wanted to rip people's eyes out. I was so angry. And I'd always thought I didn't have anger at the church and I was like really cool and chill with it. But I discovered just how much rage I had. And there was one time a very lovely auntie who I've always loved and respected. She used the tea bags from the hotel instead of the tea bags for the workshop. And I was like, you dare touch my tea bags. Oh, and I was so angry about this very minor violation. And I realized this is like me trying to set my boundaries in the same house where I never had any, and trying to reclaim and get in control of this environment that was so damaging to me. So once I realized that basically the whole business was a big piece of trauma recovery for me, I very systematically began winding down the business and closing it and getting out. And that was the end of 2019. So basically, I say I left the church when I was 30, but I was still so connected to it that it took me that long to recreate the situation in order to go through all the trauma again and get out of it. And one thing, when I was a proper Moonie, my brother said to me, as long as you're a Moonie, you'll always be poor, tired and cold. Because I was always poor, tired and cold as a Moonie. And then while I was running Ivy House as a business, I was always poor, tired and cold. And I realized, as long as I'm poor, tired and cold, I'm still a Moonie. Like, I'm still suffering. I'm still choosing suffering over happiness. I'm still destroying anything like love or connection or happiness. I'm pushing it away in favor of suffering. So I finally got out just like, what's that, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, the end of 2019. And I thought I gave myself 6 months off to just chill and recover. And I thought I'd go traveling and I'd go and have some really cool time with all these people that I hadn't seen. But beginning of 2020, even as the first words of coronavirus started spinning on the internet, the panic attacks came back. And I had worse panic attacks all of last year than I'd ever had, because I was finally sitting still. I wasn't doing anything. And all of this trauma was like, cool, we'll come along now. Your body will just express everything it hasn't expressed in all its life. So that is only recently I've worked through it with some therapy and a lot of reading and understanding what's going on in my brain and what happens in the church ex-Moonie's brain, and running and meditate, like all kinds of things. And I can proudly say my last panic attack was 8 months ago. I feel like I might be getting there, but it's an ongoing journey. It's a constant piece of recovery that I don't know if it ever ends. You just get a little bit better at it.
And the comment you made about the tea bags as well, I imagine was probably like boiling point where you have all of this stuff building up and this very like almost insignificant thing happens. And this person's probably like, oh my goodness, what have I done? Not realizing that your like overreaction to that event was a reaction to everything that had been building up.
And those 4 years of
this poor woman who's like, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that there were 2 different types of tea bags.
Exactly right.
But then you go on to continue having these very strong reactions to your situation, or thinking back on your trauma and your experiences. And you've mentioned there that you've since been to some therapy, which has helped you kind of work through things. And of course, there are those conversations that you're able to have with your family as well about all of these things, piecing it all together, working through it all, and trying to make sense of it all, or finally going through that grieving process of your childhood and not having your family with you the way that most Western families are together. So I imagine it's still very full on working through it all and piecing it all together. But I wonder, before I ask you if there's anything you think that we've missed or anything you think we should add, what your advice would be for anybody else that's going through similar experiences, or who has been through something like this and is trying to work through it themselves too.
Well, firstly, for any ex-cult stuff, there is a lot of resources out there which weren't there when I was leaving. There's some amazing podcasts that are full of examples and advice. Jen Kiaba is an amazing voice. She's very academic and analytical, and so, like, she knows her stuff. So anything by Jen Kiaba. Elgin Strait has a Falling Out pod full of really insightful stories of ex-moonies. And there's Cultic, the ICSA, full of loads of resources. So and in England, we have Gilly Jenkinson, who is one of the only ex-cult survivor specialist therapists. And actually, there's a group of us starting a course with her this week. So it's a 6-week course of evening Zoom sessions. And there are resources out there. There are people learning how to work with and do the therapy for the survivors. And the main thing that I've had to realize is you don't just leave and go, oh, I've left, I'm all right now. It's such an ongoing process, and things will keep coming up and triggering you. And anytime you find yourself doing something a little bit irrational or a little bit over the top, or too much crying or a panic attack, just be patient with yourself and realize, okay, this is part of the recovery. I was damaged, and my body is now in a safe enough place that it's ready to deal with it. And it might be 40 years after the thing, but it means your body trusts that you can now solve it. So you've got the resources, the time, maybe the money that you need. And if not, there is so much support out there. So just Google stuff, and be really patient with yourself. And if you have a partner, my partner now, I've been with him 5 years. He's so amazing. He's so understanding. And it just explained to them, this is what I'm going through. And this is what I need from you, is to just hug me right now. I don't want an analytical conversation. This is when I need a hug. And I've got very good at saying, I need you to hold my hand right now. I just need to be very close with you, whatever it is. And he's just like, yep, whatever, right, just carry on. And he's stopped trying to understand it. He just is a source of love. I'm very, very lucky that I have that. But it has taken a lot of errors before I finally got a good one.
I've said this before as well on the podcast, I think, but my grandma always used to say to me that you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince.
Yeah, yes, I have. I'm grateful for all the frogs, because they've all taught me something about myself or the world. And the people, there are so many people who are understanding and patient, and the outside world is not bad. It's full of love. There's love everywhere. There are places for connection and community outside of the church, and it will feel really scary to let go of that amazing sense of belonging but you can find it and you can create it. And I just realized the other day, my job title in my job right now is Community Development Officer for the council. And I'm like, yeah, my job is to make community. Like, how good is that? I don't need it in the church. It's everywhere. Every town has communities and groups and people full of love.
These are such incredible revelations to have as well. And even to speak about your partner and to let us know as listeners to your story and your experiences that you found true love outside of the church. You never needed the church to find that connection and that relationship and to feel that love. And now that you're not within the church and neither are your siblings, there's those relationships as well that you can have on a level that's different to what the church offered you as well, that there's no restrictions and it's unconditional. You're not being loved by people in the church because you're a member of the church. You're being loved by people for yourself. You're being loved. Exactly. You're being loved for you.
It took a very long time to believe that I deserve love just for me. That's why Workaholic was like, yeah, I'm doing a good job. That's why they love me. Of course, that makes sense. But to have my lovely partner who loves me just for me and not because I'm a blessed child or because I did a good job or anything, took me a really long time to believe that. And, you know, still something I'm working through. But yeah.
Yeah, love from family and friends should never be conditional. It shouldn't come with ifs or buts. You know, your family and your friends. You know, when you say you love someone, you shouldn't say I love them because, you know, or no, that's not a good way to phrase it. Because when my partner brings me a cup of coffee, oh, I love him because he brings me coffee. But I would never say I love him less because he hasn't brought me a coffee.
Yeah,
and exactly. I think that's the way to think about it. It shouldn't be conditional.
Yeah, and what I think I couldn't believe, I remember writing in my diary that I didn't want to boy outside of the church because the love outside of the church was not as good as the love in the church, because the bar was so high, because we had this ideal love of, oh my God, it's Heavenly Father's love and it's amazing and intense. Like it's not real. None of the stuff in the church that we gave our lives for is real. It's all imaginary. The lineage, the ancestors, the descendants, everything we give money and time and prayers for, none of it is actually real. And the imaginary concept of love, like you can imagine that concept of love anywhere and pin that on your partner. And it is up to you and your relationships what that love is, not something in a book that tells you when you have a blessing from God, that is magical love. You make that yourself. But unless you are like emotionally healthy, you can't receive that love. So as a Mooney who's been broken in the church, of course, you don't feel loved outside the church because you don't believe you are loved because you had that taken away. So like the church damaged little children so much so that for them to leave is really hard because they haven't got the emotional strength to survive in the real world, which is something that takes a long time to untangle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
A lot of people working on it, and your podcast and so many other people are like the voices of, we'll help you deconstruct, we'll help you work through this, because it is a journey and we're all on it in different stages.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, yeah. And so I'm currently reading a memoir by a lady called Mary Mahoney called Abnormal Normal, about her journey in the Children of God. But it's interesting for me to read her book because she joined in her late teens as opposed to being born into the Children of God. So the people I've spoken to, their stories come from the perspective of people that joined in infancy with their parents or were born into the movement itself. So Mary's story is very much a coming of age memoir, but it's peppered with very small pieces of psychological and psychiatric research. So she talks a lot about how humans are susceptible to certain ideas at certain points in their lives because of the developmental stages that their brains are in. So when you spoke about going over to Korea at the age you were, I was thinking you're exactly at that age Mary was talking about, because your brain hasn't fully developed. So you are very open to suggestive coercion, manipulation, and all of these things as well. So I'm really excited to bring Mary's memoir to the podcast as one of our Memoir Monday books in a giveaway in a couple of months' time, where I'm sure she'll talk us through that in more detail. And all my listeners will know that I'm not very good at coherently expressing my thoughts when I have them. So I'm here like, yes, I have a thought. Let me go all around the houses to tell you what that thought is. But that was something I thought about when you were speaking, is that you were at this exact age that Mary talks about, where all of these things happened to you. So again, that's another point in your story where you must sit back at points and cut yourself some slack and realize that these things did happen to me. But it I suppose it's important to make sure people know that they didn't let it happen to themselves. It was forced onto them, because you didn't have a choice. You were born into this, and the thought reform was already established well before you were made a victim of it. So hopefully anybody listening can have those thoughts too, and realize that there's a time to go easy on yourself and not put too much blame on yourself as well. And I just think it's incredible that you've come here and you've told us your story, and you've told us how you went from almost like having a blessed child as my hill to die on, and I will do anything to get there, to being like, do you know what, actually I've got a husband now and he's outside of the church and I love him so much and he supports me and his love is unconditional. And I just think that's so incredible, and such a beacon of hope as well for people who are listening, who might be going through similar experiences and working through their own trauma.
Yeah, hope so.
So I think we've covered everything today, unless you think, Miriam, that there's anything we've missed. I think we've had a really nice in-depth discussion about everything. Oh, and also I did just want to quickly, before we wrap up, let the listeners know that you did sit down with your family and have a conversation about coming on the show. You discussed it with them before coming to speak with me today, and to let them know what we were going to be discussing, and they all seemed okay with it. So you're having dialogue about speaking out about the church as well.
Yeah. So that's a new development for me, and I've got an Instagram and I've started like sharing bits of stories, and there are so many very strong voices out there, and I'm inspired by and want to join in with those. And I think that the English church perspective is slightly different than the American one. And it seems like from the American stories I've heard, there's some very dark and sinister times. But I think in England, we were a little bit removed from the epicenter of the church in America and Korea. So it wasn't, for me personally, all the intensity and all the like craziness was what I picked up in Korea and America. It wasn't thrown at me in England. So everyone's got a different experience. And I think that more stories will come out and more people will see that there is love and happiness wherever you are bringing that love and happiness. It's not dependent on being in the church.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that's very important for people to hear as well, and a good time to just say thank you to your family if any of them ever do decide to go ahead and listen to this episode. Some of them might think it's not something I want to hear. Some of them might think, oh, I wonder if she mentioned me. And some people might think, oh, I'm interested on her perspective on what life was like for her when she was growing up. What was life like for young Miriam, teenage Miriam? I would really like to hear her perspective, speaking with somebody who was not directly involved in the situation. So for any of the family that's listening, just it's incredible that you're so supportive of each other, and just thank you for being allies and for helping Miriam get through this experience, and also for helping other people, because this episode could bring some hope for other people listening who perhaps struggle with family conversations or haven't thought that it's possible to have those conversations. So just again, a quick thank you to people that go that extra mile to make sure that those relationships can stay strong. So I think that brings us to the end of our episode, Miriam, and I have to just say a massive thank you for coming on the show, sharing your experiences, being so open and honest with us, and showing us the bright and positive side, the bright side of the moon, as opposed to the dark side.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for hosting and for your amazing podcast, which is such a resource for people. It's really, really wonderful.
I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, Miriam. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye. That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to find out more, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod or email me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.